We do stand here today, and I guess the most constant thing or constant dimension in this important sector is change itself. Because again, I think last time I spoke to you was probably a year ago. It was very interesting, it was very intriguing. New national and state arrangements were developing. Guess where we stand today? A very similar story. And looking at your conference agenda, I'm very pleased to see most of the elements of this new market design feature in your program. We have a developing national scene. We have a new standards authority beginning to form in its early days of formation. We have a new national regulator already out there hitting the streets, and Chris Robinson is here, so I'm sure you're looking forward to hearing Chris's spiel. And I'm very pleased that someone who actually understands this important policy frame called vocational education and training heads our regulator. So that will be certainly an interesting space. We've got a national policy debate around funding frameworks. Claire's already mentioned this term called entitlement. I will certainly talk about that today. We have, again, another constant, apprenticeship reform. We're talking about apprenticeship reform again. That's important. I'll touch on that also. And we have this thing called unique student identifiers and data and the like. I won't dwell too much on that today. In Queensland, we are certainly focusing on how do we position this state, how do we position the state in terms of the national agenda, but more importantly, how do we position the state to meet the needs of this future economy, or a patchwork economy as it's being called. So I think the topic that I've been asked to talk about today is actually really relevant. It's very, very important that we reflect together on what is your role. So what is the role of the suppliers of our skills? So that's private and public providers. So I will try and build that into what I talk about today. So whilst I won't talk too much about Queensland, it's not all about Queensland, and anyone who believes that is clearly mistaken, but I'll use our Queensland experience to reflect on this important time we have in the tertiary education sector. So this thing called Skills Queensland, I won't dwell on it. Yes, it's a statutory body, so what? There are other skills commissions operating in the country, most notably Victoria and South Australia, but our point of difference in Queensland is that we have a reasonable organisation forming within the Commission, so there is a separation from government. That's a point of difference. And it's also a real point of difference in terms of the roles and responsibilities that we are being given, certainly around strategic direction, but also around purchasing and procurement and the direction of the sector. But for us to succeed, our point of difference happens to be industry or the broader church of industry. On our board, we have significant experience, both in terms of industry, in terms of vocational education and training. We have two managing directors of globally listed companies, ASX listed companies. They put a very, very fresh dimension to this thing called vocational education and training. And we're building relationships as we start to re-gear the system with the suppliers, that being you. So I'd like to touch on, in terms of this national debate, why industry? And I won't start critiquing Bill Clinton or any other leader, but I'll use them occasionally today. And he was asked a question similarly about reform in the United States once, and he just said it's about the economy, stupid. The lessons in our sector over the last few economic cycles, if you can now call them cycles, is that our sector responded far slower than the economy. Government will always react to the economy. Your business cases, your client group will respond to the needs of the economy. But there's some lessons in vocational education and training, and I think that's what's driving us. Yes, the needs of the sector are broader than those trying to enter the labour market. Yes, the needs of the sector are broader than those wanting to upskill within the economy. So yes, community is also very, very important, as are citizens. So it has to be quite broad. So let's just touch on why the economy. Again, I'll quote a leader, Obama. I like this in VET. To response to a problem, Obama once said, money is not only the answer, money makes the difference. And when I read that, I almost said, welcome to vocational education and training. Money does drive behaviour. There's unintended consequences when we tweak things in the centre, and some of you have certainly been fairly open in giving me some feedback about some change we've made over the years. But can I say these lessons I will acknowledge are about the public funding part of the system. We know there's a large component of skills development out there that happens well away from public funding, and that's important. But let's go back to 2008. We were in boom times, perhaps early 2008. We're in boom times. what was happening in our thing called the publicly funded training sector. We were struggling to cope. Our system was designed on centrally managed contracts. So we would pump money out, give you contract values and hope you could live within them. And when you didn't, you had to come in and ask for more money, and we'd try and jiggle it. And what we found during the boom, employers were making big employment decisions, upskilling their workforces, putting on new people, both as apprentices and through other fields. We struggled to cope. Backlogs started to appear in the system. So we lost opportunities around productivity. It overheated. Then when the bust came, and it came pretty quickly, the thing we now call the global financial crisis, something else happened. Internationally, if you look at the skills sector, what happened was it wasn't that elaborate. The strategies employed were about moving from employment-first strategies, like apprenticeships, to training-first strategies. It took us a year to get those programs in place. It took us too long. And while some of the programs looked fantastic, by the time students started to graduate, and these were the next wave of kids for the future economy, parts of the economy had moved on, so we missed the mark. Now, why is that? Because we had to go out with the marketplace and renegotiate funding, reallocate funding, and it took us too long. In a perfect world, would have had nothing to do with us sitting in the centre pulling levers. You would have been out responding to employers, students, putting packages together and getting on with it. There's some lessons there, some very sobering lessons. So, in that sense, it is about markets. It is about how do we facilitate interactions with the training market of Australia. And I acknowledge this stuff's happening nationally, and certainly Victoria led the way around this new term called entitlement. South Australia is progressing on important policy. So, let's have a look at, though, this patchwork economy. This is an economic dimension. Skills are about the economy, skills are about workforce participation, skills are about productivity. But when you look at this thing called an economy, it's certainly not booming, is it? Mining, we all know about. Every time you pick up the papers, we understand the resources sector and its supply chains, can I acknowledge. Coal seam gas, some really important parts of Queensland. Health and community services is also growing its workforce across Queensland. It's a real challenge. If you talk to some local mayors, which I've done recently around what they're experiencing in their communities, they don't talk about mining. Why don't they talk about mining? Because they know they're going to get their people. They talk about how do we resource our hospitals, our childcare centres and the like. That's a challenge for us because those industries can't compete with wages. But after you go past that, education training is doing all right. It becomes a bit hard. Construction's on the positive, but let me tell you, construction's only positive because of the resources sector. Housing sector is in desperate trouble. The general commercial construction sector is in trouble outside of what's fuelled by resources. So, there's some challenges there. If you then add what's happening in training, what's the challenge? How big is this challenge to reform our sector? In the last 10 years, again, I apologise for being Queensland-centric, but in the last 10 years, Queensland's population has grown by about 1 million people. Growth in recent times is slow, but about 1 million people. How many extra people do you think we're training 10 years on in the vocational education training sector? It's not 1 million, it's 100. Over 10 years, we've grown our sector by 100 in publicly funded training. So that tells us, if you look at a health check, we haven't quite got some of the levers right. Don't get me wrong, we've done some substantial reform, particularly what was driven in 2006 through the skills plan, but we still need, it's back to Obama's quote, money. We still need money. And unfortunately, we are also in Queensland, behind the 8 ball. If you look at investment levels, we're below national averages in terms of governments, not just Queensland, governments' investment in vet. We're also below the national average in terms of industry contribution. And here's the thing. Industry, if you look at research, invests about $16.5 billion a year in skills development.